Devon Marks was an unassuming figure in the bustling tech world, an IT specialist with a reputation for diligence, precision, and quiet professionalism. His days were spent in front of computer screens, analyzing code, tracking server logins, and ensuring the security of sensitive company data. But everything changed one ordinary afternoon, during what seemed like a typical team lunch. Devon collapsed without warning, a lifeless heap among his colleagues. Paramedics arrived quickly, but it was too late. Devon Marks was dead. At first, the cause of his sudden collapse was unclear, but a toxicology report would soon reveal a chilling truth. Lab-grade nerve toxin, a substance known for its lethal properties, had coursed through his veins. This wasn't a heart attack or a stroke. Devon Marks had been poisoned. The investigation into his death would reveal a deeper, darker secret lurking beneath the surface of Devon's seemingly quiet life. As detectives dug into his professional history, they discovered a troubling pattern, one that connected Devon's untimely demise to corporate sabotage. His work in cybersecurity had brought him face to face with something far more dangerous than anyone could have imagined. This is the story of a man who uncovered a dangerous truth and paid the ultimate price for it. What really happened to Devon Marks? And who was behind his murder? Devon Marks had built a quiet but successful career in the world of information technology. As an IT specialist, he was highly regarded by his colleagues for his meticulous attention to detail and his ability to solve complex problems. His days revolved around overseeing critical infrastructure, ensuring the safety of sensitive company data, and managing server logins that tracked the flow of proprietary information. His role, though behind the scenes, was one of immense responsibility. Devon wasn't just an IT professional. He was the silent guardian of the company's most valuable asset, its intellectual property. Much of his work involved monitoring server access to prevent breaches and safeguard patents that were set to revolutionize the tech industry. His contributions often went unnoticed by the general public, but within the company, he was an essential figure, trusted with confidential information and tasked with maintaining the digital integrity of the business. Yet beneath his calm exterior, Devon had started to notice something troubling. Unexplained irregularities were appearing in the server logs. Suspicious logins accessing sensitive data linked to the company's most coveted patents. Devon's technical expertise led him to raise alarms about these anomalies, though his warnings were largely met with indifference. His growing concerns went unheeded as he dug deeper into the server logs, unknowingly stepping into a dangerous web of corporate espionage. Before his tragic death, Devon had flagged these irregularities. What he didn't know was that his discovery had made him a target. Someone had noticed his vigilance, and someone was willing to go to extreme lengths to silence him. As the investigation into Devon's death unfolds, Beyond the Evidence will continue to examine the hidden layers of this case, revealing a shocking truth about betrayal, corporate greed, and the high stakes of protecting information. For a deeper dive into this and other compelling stories, don't forget to subscribe to Beyond the Evidence and stay tuned for further revelations. The truth awaits. Devon Marks was known among his colleagues as the reliable, low-key IT specialist, the type of person who preferred to keep a low profile while getting the job done. His interactions with others were polite but distant, shaped by his deep focus on the technical aspects of his work. Yet, Beneath the surface of his professional demeanor, there existed a complex web of relationships, some positive and others strained, that would soon come to light as the investigation into his death unfolded. Among his co-workers, Devon had formed close bonds with a few select individuals, but his most notable professional relationship was with Sarah Walters, the company's head of operations. Sarah and Devon had worked together closely for years, and their mutual respect for one another had fostered a sense of camaraderie. Devon often sought Sarah's counsel when navigating the more challenging aspects of his role, especially when it came to securing sensitive data. Sarah, in turn, appreciated Devon's unassuming nature and his ability to approach problems with a calm, methodical mindset. However, not all relationships within the office were as harmonious. Several colleagues spoke of growing tensions, particularly between Devon and another team member, Mark Donovan. Mark, a rising star in the company's security department, had a more ambitious, sometimes abrasive, approach to work. He often clashed with Devon over technical matters, with disagreements escalating as they jockeyed for influence within the company. Mark had a competitive streak, always pushing for recognition and success, while Devon remained content with his behind-the-scenes role. At first glance, these tensions might seem typical of any office environment, but the dynamics between Devon and Mark took on a more sinister tone as the investigation progressed. Mark had been in close proximity to Devon in the weeks leading up to his death, and the two had a series of contentious discussions over Devon's recent findings regarding the security breaches. Devon's growing concern about the irregular logins put him at odds with Mark, who was more focused on maintaining the company's reputation than confronting potential internal threats. Meanwhile, a more subtle but equally concerning dynamic was emerging with another colleague, Emma Jenkins. Emma, an associate in the finance department, had noticed Devon's increasing secrecy in the days leading up to his death. She had observed him becoming more withdrawn, as if he were carrying a heavy burden. Emma was concerned, but she had also been distracted by her own personal struggles, making it difficult for her to reach out or offer support. Still, the growing isolation Devon experienced in the workplace, coupled with the mounting pressures from both Sarah and Mark, seemed to be taking a toll. The subtle undercurrents of these relationships became more pronounced after Devon's death. As the investigation unfolded, many of his colleagues appeared genuinely shocked, but some, especially Mark, seemed to take a more guarded approach. The strain in their interactions, particularly between Devon and Mark, painted a troubling picture of workplace tensions that may have been a precursor to the deadly act of sabotage. As the investigation deepened, the dynamics between these characters would reveal crucial insights into the motive behind Devon's murder. It was clear that the work environment, which should have been one of collaboration, was instead laced with competition, mistrust, and unresolved conflicts. Devon Mark's collapse during a routine lunch should have been nothing more than an unfortunate medical incident. But the suddenness of his fall and the circumstances surrounding his death soon raised more questions than answers. Paramedics arrived at the scene quickly, but despite their best efforts, Devon was unresponsive. The cause of his sudden collapse remained elusive for a few days, until the toxicology reports came back with shocking findings. The truth was undeniable. Devon Marks had been poisoned. A lab-grade nerve toxin, a substance typically found in controlled laboratory environments, had been found in his system. It wasn't a natural death, and it wasn't an accident. Someone had deliberately chosen to end his life. The initial suspicion pointed to the possibility of a heart attack or stroke, but the presence of the nerve toxin shifted the focus of the investigation entirely. This wasn't a random act of violence. It was a calculated murder. What followed was a slow and methodical unraveling of Devon's last few weeks at work. As investigators combed through Devon's professional life, they discovered an unsettling pattern. Devon had recently flagged a series of irregularities in the company's server logs, anomalies that appeared to be unauthorized access to sensitive patent data. These logins had been occurring at odd hours, and in some cases, the access was linked to accounts that weren't immediately recognizable. Devon had spent hours poring over the data, trying to make sense of the unusual activity, and it was clear that he had uncovered something significant. He had been acting on these findings for several weeks, but the company had largely dismissed his concerns. Some of his colleagues, including Mark Donovan, had brushed off the warnings, citing the stress of Devon's meticulous nature as the source of the issue. Yet Devon persisted, seemingly driven by a desire to protect the company from potential data breaches, data that was worth millions of dollars in intellectual property. Despite his growing anxiety, Devon continued working diligently, keeping his discoveries to himself as much as possible. His warning flags were clear, but Devon knew better than to trust just anyone with such sensitive information. It wasn't until a week before his death that Devon confided in Sarah Walters, the head of operations, that he had reason to believe someone within the company was accessing the server system for personal gain. Devon's trust in Sarah was built on years of working side by side, but even Sarah, while concerned, had been unable to act quickly enough to prevent the tragedy that was about to unfold. The investigation took a more chilling turn when forensic experts examined Devon's personal belongings. They found something startling. Devon's coffee mug, which he had used on the day of his collapse, was found to contain residue from the same nerve toxin that had poisoned him. It was evident that Devon had consumed the toxin, but how had it ended up in his system? The discovery of the mug marked a pivotal moment in the case, proof that the source of the poison had been in the workplace, in the most ordinary of settings. But what was even more troubling was the realization that the toxin was intentionally placed there, likely by someone who knew exactly how to manipulate Devon's environment without raising suspicion. In the days following the discovery, investigators scoured the company's surveillance footage. What they found was even more damning. A colleague who had been working in close proximity to Devon was seen entering the server room under an alias login. The footage, combined with Devon's flagged server activity, suggested that someone inside the company was not only aware of Devon's discoveries, but was actively working to cover their tracks. The mounting evidence pointed to an unsettling conclusion. Devon's murder was the result of someone trying to silence him before he could reveal the full extent of what he had uncovered. As the investigation deepened, investigators turned their attention to the possibility of corporate espionage. Someone within the company had likely been accessing the sensitive data for a much larger, illegal purpose. With the suspicion now firmly focused on the workplace, Devon's death was no longer just a tragic accident. It was a deliberate act of sabotage. As the investigation into Devon Mark's death progressed, the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place, but the truth was far more sinister than anyone had imagined. The discovery of the toxic nerve agent in Devon's system and the residue on his coffee mug were just the beginning of a deeper, more disturbing series of events. The initial focus on the workplace seemed to point to sabotage, but the further investigators dug into Devon's professional life, the more complex the case became. A key turning point in the investigation came when investigators examined the details of Devon's flagged server logins. These logins, which Devon had flagged as irregular, were traced back to several instances of unauthorized access to the company's most valuable intellectual property, sensitive patent data. The patents, which represented cutting-edge technology, had the potential to be worth millions of dollars, and anyone with access to this data would be able to sell it to the highest bidder. It was becoming clearer that Devon had uncovered a significant breach, one that involved not just casual hacking, but an organized effort to steal and sell company secrets. While it was clear that someone inside the company had been accessing these files, it wasn't until cyber forensic experts went deeper into the server logs that the true nature of the crime came to light. The unauthorized logins were traced to an alias, a username that didn't match any of the employees listed on the company directory. This was no random hacker. It was someone with inside knowledge of the company's systems, someone who knew how to cover their tracks and avoid detection. The alias had been used frequently, always at odd hours, and the pattern of activity suggested that whoever was behind these logins had been gathering information over a long period of time, likely with the intention of stealing and profiting from the company's patents. Investigators turned their attention to the employees who had access to these sensitive systems and were in close proximity to Devon. The surveillance footage of the office building from the day of Devon's collapse revealed a critical piece of evidence. A coworker had entered the server room using the same alias login that had been flagged in the server logs. This individual was seen leaving the area after spending several minutes in the server room, with no other employees in sight. The footage was damning. This was the moment that the crime began to take shape. The person on the surveillance footage had the motive, the opportunity, and the means to execute the crime. But who were they? As investigators continued to cross-reference data, they found shipping receipts linking this coworker to a black market laboratory known for producing lab-grade toxins. The connection was shocking. The same nerve toxin found in Devon's system had been linked to underground labs that specialized in creating dangerous substances for illegal use. The shipping receipts revealed that this employee had been involved in acquiring the very toxin that was used to kill Devon. These labs, often operating in the shadows of legitimate business, were known for supplying dangerous chemicals to anyone willing to pay for them, often to the highest bidder, including organized crime syndicates and competitors looking to destroy their rivals. The implications of this discovery were far-reaching. Not only had someone inside the company been actively stealing sensitive data, but they had also gone to great lengths to ensure that Devon's investigation into the breach was silenced. The use of a nerve toxin to kill him was a deliberate act of murder, but it was also a calculated move to prevent further exposure of the corporate espionage taking place within the company. As the investigation began to zero in on the prime suspect, the true scope of the crime became more evident. Devon had not just stumbled upon a data breach. He had uncovered a web of corporate espionage that reached far beyond his office. The murder was not just a personal attack on Devon. It was a deliberate attempt to keep the company's most valuable secrets out of the hands of law enforcement and to ensure that the thief's tracks remained covered. But the deeper the investigation went, the more it became clear that someone had underestimated Devon's dedication to uncovering the truth. The crime, it seemed, had been years in the making. The unauthorized access to sensitive data had been an ongoing process, likely orchestrated by someone with inside knowledge of the company's operations and the specific vulnerabilities in its systems. Devon's efforts to flag the irregular logins had been his undoing. In the end, his pursuit of justice had cost him his life. As investigators continued to build their case, the suspect's identity came into sharper focus. The pieces of the puzzle were slowly falling into place, and the question on everyone's mind was no longer whether Devon's death had been a murder, but rather who would be held responsible for the crime. The days following Devon Mark's death were marked by a sense of disbelief and unease within the company. His sudden collapse had left a gaping hole, both in the workplace and in the lives of his colleagues. For many, Devon had been a quiet, reliable presence, someone they could always count on to handle the most sensitive tasks with skill and discretion. His tragic and sudden death left his colleagues grappling with shock and confusion. But as the investigation unfolded, the underlying truth began to unravel. In the immediate aftermath of Devon's collapse, the company's leadership scrambled to contain the situation. The toxicology report and the evidence of foul play were unsettling, but it was the discovery of the nerve toxin in Devon's system that cast a dark shadow over the workplace. The questions surrounding his death quickly turned from medical speculation to criminal investigation. As law enforcement entered the scene, the atmosphere in the office shifted from a somber morning to a tense, cautious waiting game. Employees who had once worked side by side with Devon were now forced to confront the possibility that someone within their own ranks had orchestrated the murder. Among his colleagues, the reactions were varied. Some seemed genuinely devastated by the loss of their coworker. Devon's quiet dedication had earned him the respect of those who had worked closely with him. His sudden departure left a palpable emptiness in the office. Sarah Walters, who had known Devon well, struggled with feelings of guilt. She had been one of the last people to whom Devon had confided his growing concerns about the security breaches. While she had been unable to act on his warnings immediately, she couldn't shake the feeling that perhaps more could have been done to prevent his tragic death. It was a heavy burden that weighed on her shoulders as she watched the investigation unfold. Then there was Mark Donovan, whose response to the news of Devon's death was more guarded. His relationship with Devon had been fraught with tension, especially in the weeks leading up to the murder. Mark had often clashed with Devon over technical matters, and there had been an underlying sense of competition between the two. When the investigation turned toward corporate espionage, with evidence pointing to a potential inside job, Mark's reactions were scrutinized. His initial shock seemed genuine, but some of his colleagues couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to his demeanor than met the eye. In the wake of the investigation, the company's leadership was left to pick up the pieces. Their reputation was now on the line, with the revelation that a trusted employee had been the victim of a calculated murder. As the pressure mounted, the focus shifted to finding the person responsible for the crime. Colleagues who had once shared lunches and casual conversations now found themselves casting wary glances at one another. Everyone was a potential suspect, and trust within the office had been irrevocably shattered. Yet, amidst the turmoil, there were those who seemed unaffected by the tragedy. The investigation continued, but as more evidence began to surface, it became apparent that some employees had been hiding more than just secrets about their professional work. The reactions to Devon's death weren't just a reflection of personal loss, but an indication of the underlying tensions that had festered within the company long before the murder took place. As law enforcement moved forward with their investigation, it became clear that the motive behind Devon's murder was much more than a simple act of vengeance. The corporate espionage, the black market ties, and the internal betrayal painted a chilling picture of the extent to which greed and ambition could drive someone to extreme measures. It was only a matter of time before the pieces fell into place, and the identity of the person behind Devon's death would be revealed. As the investigation into Devon Mark's death reached its final stages, the truth slowly came into focus, piece by chilling piece. The evidence pointed squarely at one individual, Jessica Vance, a colleague from the company's logistics and supply chain department. Jessica's initial response to the investigation had been calm, even seemingly innocent, but as forensic investigators continued to piece together the various strands of evidence, a clearer picture emerged of her involvement in a far-reaching corporate conspiracy. The breakthrough came when investigators cross-referenced the shipping receipts that had been linked to the black market labs producing the nerve toxin. Among the receipts was one tied to Jessica, marking her as the key suspect. Her connection to the black market laboratories, which had been supplying chemicals for illicit purposes, was now undeniable. Jessica had been actively purchasing toxic substances and coordinating with underground suppliers, all while maintaining her position at the company, unassuming to her colleagues and seemingly loyal to the organization. But as investigators dug deeper into her activities, it became clear that her motives were tied to a much larger, far more dangerous scheme. Jessica had been stealing sensitive data from the company's servers for months, selling it to competitors, and using her position to cover her tracks. When Devon began to flag the irregular logins and brought attention to the breach, Jessica realized that her time was running out. Devon had not only uncovered the theft, but he had also discovered evidence that could destroy everything she had worked to gain. Faced with the potential exposure of her crimes, Jessica made a fateful decision. She would silence Devon permanently. And to do so, she orchestrated the perfect murder, one that would look like an unfortunate accident, a case of food poisoning, or some other unexplained medical incident. But Devon's persistence in flagging the irregularities had put him in her crosshairs, and the carefully executed poisoning was the final step in ensuring her secret remained buried. The investigation culminated in Jessica's arrest, and the revelation of her crimes sent shockwaves through the company. The betrayal was not just personal but corporate, shaking the very foundation of trust within the organization. Employees who had worked with Jessica for years felt the sting of her deception, many grappling with the realization that someone so close had been hiding such dark secrets. The company's reputation was severely damaged, and questions arose about how deeply the corruption had infiltrated the ranks. Jessica's arrest also served as a reminder of the lengths to which people would go for money, power, and control, how a single act of greed could destroy lives, families, and the fabric of an entire organization. But the consequences of Jessica's actions didn't stop at the company. The ripple effect of Devon's death spread beyond the walls of the workplace, impacting his family, his friends, and the wider community. His parents, still reeling from the sudden loss of their son, were left to confront the bitter reality that his life had been cut short by someone within the very organization he had trusted and worked for. His friends mourned not only his death, but also the brutal nature of his murder. The fact that someone he had worked alongside, someone he might have even considered a colleague or a friend, had been the one to end his life. The loss was not just the taking of a life, but a betrayal of the trust that Devon had placed in those around him. The company itself faced its own reckoning. Jessica's arrest was only the beginning. The corporation was forced to review its internal practices, security protocols, and the handling of sensitive information. The breach, the espionage, and the murder had exposed critical flaws in the company's structure, flaws that would take years to repair. Investors, clients, and customers all looked on with skepticism, wondering how an organization that had been trusted with cutting-edge technology could allow such a breach to occur. The fallout was immense, with reputations tarnished and relationships irreparably damaged. As the dust began to settle, the case of Devon Marks served as a stark reminder of the dangers that lie beneath the surface of the corporate world. It was a warning about the vulnerability of even the most trusted organizations to internal threats. And it was a reminder that sometimes the greatest danger doesn't come from the outside, but from those who are closest to us, the ones we work alongside every day, trusting them with our secrets, our lives, and our futures. For those following the investigation, there were still many unanswered questions. How deep did the conspiracy go? How many others were involved in the web of corporate espionage that had claimed Devon's life? The case raised troubling ethical questions about the nature of corporate culture, security, and the lengths some people would go to in order to maintain control. The pursuit of power, money, and personal gain had led to a tragic and irreversible consequence, leaving the company, Devon's family, and the wider community to pick up the pieces. Now that the case has come to a close, Beyond the Evidence invites you to reflect on the questions this case raises about trust, betrayal, and the fragility of the world we often take for granted. Were you able to spot the signs? How much do you really know about the people you work with? Join us as we continue to uncover the hidden truths behind high-stakes crimes. And don't forget to subscribe to stay informed on future investigations. Your thoughts and comments are always welcome. Share with us what you think about this case. And if you want to dive deeper into similar stories, hit that subscribe button to stay engaged with Beyond the Evidence.